You probably knew a child like this. Or maybe you were one. The kid who cried at things other children barely noticed, who asked questions adults weren't ready for, who lay awake at night not because something bad happened, but because they were still turning over a look someone gave them at lunch, still replaying a tone of voice, still worrying about whether a friend seemed a little quieter than usual and what that might mean. The child who felt the energy in a room shift before anyone said a word, who could tell when their parents were stressed, even when they were smiling, who absorbed other people's moods like a sponge and had no idea how to wring them out. Adults had a word for this child. Too sensitive, too emotional, too intense. They said it like a diagnosis, like something that needed correcting, like the child's inner volume was a problem that just needed the right knob turned down. But here's what the science now tells us. That knob was never broken. And the child who felt everything so deeply? They weren't struggling in spite of how they were wired. In many cases, they were quietly becoming some of the most perceptive, empathetic, and emotionally intelligent people their world would ever know. Let's start with what researchers actually call this pattern, because it has a name, and that name matters. In the 1990s, psychologist Elaine Aron began studying a trait she noticed in roughly 15 to 20% of the population. She called it sensory processing sensitivity, and what she found immediately challenged the cultural story we tell about sensitive people. This wasn't anxiety. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't something that needed to be treated or managed or talked out of. It was a nervous system that processes the world more deeply than most, more thoroughly, more completely. A nervous system that doesn't skim the surface of experience the way others do, but instead goes all the way down, catching nuance, registering subtlety, picking up on information that most people's brains quietly filter out before it ever reaches consciousness. Aron identified 4 core characteristics that define this trait: deep processing of information, overstimulation from intense environments, emotional reactivity, and high empathy, and what she called sensitivity to subtleties, the ability to notice small details in the environment that others simply walk past without registering. These aren't 4 weaknesses, they are 4 forms of perception. And in a child who has never been told that this is what they are, they can feel like 4 different ways of being wrong. So what is actually happening inside the brain of a highly sensitive child? Because this is where it gets genuinely fascinating. Neuroimaging research from Stony Brook University found that highly sensitive people show significantly greater activation in brain regions associated with awareness, empathy, and the integration of complex emotional information. Specifically, the insula, which is the brain's internal sensing organ, the part that registers what your body and emotions are doing in real time, and the mirror neuron system, which underlies our capacity to feel what others feel, to track emotional states and simulate them inside ourselves. What this means practically is that the sensitive child at the loud birthday party, pressed against the wall, visibly overwhelmed, is not being dramatic. Their brain is genuinely processing more than everyone else in the room. The noise, the social dynamics, the faces, the competing emotional states of 15 other children, all of it is being taken in, processed, and integrated simultaneously. The exhaustion is neurological. The overwhelm is real. The tears aren't a performance. The nervous system is simply doing what it was built to do, at full volume all the time. A 2014 study published in the journal Brain and Behavior found that when highly sensitive people viewed photographs of emotional faces, strangers expressing joy, sadness, fear, their brains showed stronger activation in areas linked to empathy and social processing than the control group. They weren't just seeing the faces. They were feeling them, involuntarily, immediately, and deeply. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable neurological activity. The sensitive child who says, "I don't know why I'm crying," often genuinely doesn't know. Because the feeling arrived before the thought. Because their nervous system responded before their conscious mind had a chance to catch up. You know what this looks like in real life? Because you've seen it or lived it. It's the child who cannot sleep after a single upsetting scene in a film, even a film that was meant to be funny. It's the one who needs 20 minutes to transition between activities, not because they're being difficult, but because their mind is still fully inside the last thing and hasn't found the door out yet. It's the child who asks at bedtime, completely unprompted, whether the homeless man they passed on the street has somewhere warm to sleep tonight. At age 5, it's the child who picks up on the tension between their parents 2 hours before anyone has said a word, who walks into a classroom and immediately scans every face. Not consciously, but automatically, taking emotional inventory of the room before they've even put their bag down. Who knows, without being told, that their teacher is having a hard day? It's the child who cries at commercials, who can't watch the news, who becomes genuinely distressed when they see an animal in pain on a nature documentary, long after other children have moved on, who sometimes seems to carry the weight of other people's feelings alongside their own, as if the boundary between their inner world and everyone else's is thinner than it should be. It's also, and this is the part that stays, the child who internalizes the words too sensitive and turns them into a belief about themselves, who starts to see their own depth as a liability, who learns to apologize for crying, who spends years building walls around the very thing that makes them remarkable. Now here's something that changes how you see all of this. And it's one of the most important findings in developmental psychology in the last 30 years. Researcher Jay Belsky at UC Davis, along with colleagues Michael Pluess and Bruce Ellis, developed what they call differential susceptibility theory. Sometimes it's called the orchid and dandelion hypothesis. And the idea is this: most children are like dandelions. They grow in almost any conditions. They're resilient, adaptable, relatively unbothered. A difficult environment slows them down a little. A good environment helps them a little. But the range isn't enormous either way. Highly sensitive children are like orchids. In the wrong conditions, in an environment that is harsh, chaotic, unpredictable, or emotionally cold, they struggle more than most. The research confirms this. Sensitive children in difficult environments show worse outcomes on nearly every measure researchers track. But place an orchid in the right conditions, and something remarkable happens. In warm, stable, attuned environments, in homes where emotions are named and not punished, where the child's sensitivity is seen as a feature and not a bug, highly sensitive children don't just do as well as their peers. They outperform them. They show higher levels of creativity, emotional intelligence, social awareness, and what psychologists call pro-social behavior, genuine care for others, at rates significantly above average. The trait isn't a disadvantage. It's an amplifier. It amplifies the environment it's placed in. And that means the environment we give these children isn't just important. It's everything. Here is where developmental psychologists point to something that doesn't get nearly enough attention. Most highly sensitive children are never told that what they have is a trait. Not a flaw, not a phase, not something they'll grow out of. A trait. A fixed neurological heritable feature of how their brain works, that roughly 1 in 5 people shares, and that has been present in human populations across cultures and throughout history. Almost certainly because it conferred real evolutionary advantages to groups that had members capable of deep perception and strong social attunement. Instead, they receive a very different message. They receive, "Stop crying. You're overreacting. Why do you always take things so personally? You're too much." And because children are meaning-making creatures, because they are trying to understand the world and their place in it, they translate these messages into something about who they are. Not, "I am doing something adults find difficult," but "I am something adults find difficult." That distinction is enormous, and it follows them. The sensitive child, who never receives an explanation, grows into an adult who has spent decades managing, suppressing, and apologizing for a depth that was never a mistake to begin with, who has built an entire personality around making themselves more tolerable, who has learned to perform the emotional flatness that the world rewarded, while quietly feeling everything underneath. Therapists who work with highly sensitive adults often describe the same pattern. Not the trait itself, but the shame around the trait. The grief of having spent so long treating your most profound capacity as your greatest defect. So what does a highly sensitive child actually need? Because the research is surprisingly clear on this. They need attunement more than they need correction. Studies consistently show that sensitive children respond far more strongly to authoritative parenting, warm, responsive, structured, than their less sensitive peers do. The same warmth that produces modest improvements in a less sensitive child produces dramatic ones in a sensitive child. They are not just benefiting from it, they are built for it. They need their feelings named, not dismissed. Researchers in emotion coaching, a concept developed by psychologist John Gottman, found that children whose parents helped them identify and label their emotions showed stronger immune function, better academic performance, fewer behavioral problems, and more stable friendships than those whose emotions were minimized or punished. For sensitive children, this effect is even more pronounced. The simple act of saying, "It makes sense that you feel overwhelmed right now," rewires the story the child is building about themselves. They need to know that the trait has a name. This sounds small. It isn't. The moment a highly sensitive child learns that their experience has a name, that it's shared by millions of people, that it's been studied and documented and found to carry genuine strengths, something shifts. The shame loses its grip. The story changes from "I am broken" to "I am built differently." And that change, small as it sounds, can redirect an entire life. They need environments that allow for recovery, quiet time, downtime between stimulating activities, space to process before responding. These aren't indulgences. For a nervous system working at the level a sensitive child's does, they're maintenance. The same way an athlete needs recovery time, a sensitive child needs decompression. Not to avoid the world, but to stay present in it. There is a version of this story that ends well, and it tends to hinge on one thing: whether someone, at some point in the sensitive child's early life, decided to be curious about their depth, instead of alarmed by it. Not the parent who said, "Stop crying." The one who sat down and asked, "What are you feeling right now?" Not the teacher who said, "You're too sensitive for this classroom." The one who pulled them aside after class and said, "I noticed you picked up on something the other students missed." That's a gift. It doesn't take much. Research consistently shows that even one attuned, consistent relationship in childhood, one person who sees the trait for what it is, can dramatically alter a sensitive child's developmental trajectory. One person who treated their depth as data rather than drama, who made them feel that the way they experience the world is not a burden to be managed, but a capacity to be understood. That child grows up differently. Not without difficulty. Sensitive adults still feel everything deeply. They still get overwhelmed in loud places. They still absorb other people's moods without meaning to. But they carry it differently. They don't apologize for it. They don't spend their energy trying to become someone smaller. They have learned, at the most fundamental level, that the way they are built is not wrong, and the world around them tends to notice. Because highly sensitive people, when they know what they are and have made peace with it, are often the ones who can walk into a room and know exactly what someone needs. The ones who see the thing no one else saw. The ones who ask the question that unlocks something. The ones who make the people around them feel genuinely understood. Sometimes for the first time. That doesn't come from having fewer feelings. It comes from having learned to trust them. The sensitive child was never too much. The world around them was simply not yet big enough to hold what they were carrying. And the most important thing any of us can do, as parents, as teachers, as the adults these children grow into, is to be the person who finally makes enough room